Good morning, everyone. Let's get rid of this screen share. Oh, and now my phone is playing it back to me, which is a delight. I hope you're all well. Morning, Kathy.
Good morning, Chrissa.
How are you?
I'm good. It's good to be here.
You're the dream team. The dream team. Talking about our lovely special interest of trauma with a smile on our faces. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Krista. I'm the founder of Sunshine Support, and I'm joined this morning by my wonderful colleague and wonderful friend, Kathy Long. Kathy, I'll introduce her in a moment because it's going to take me about half an hour to reel off what she actually does and what she specialises in, because she's incredible. But she's very well known to us as the Mary Poppins of social work, because Kathy is an independent social worker and an incredible human being, and she saved my family and she saved so many others, which I won't go into because it will bring her to tears, because that's what happens to us. But Kathy, in fact, Kathy, you tell us your official title now, because I know that you've done more training since I've heard your last title. So you tell me more about what you do. Introduce yourself to the crowd.
Okay, so I'm an independent social worker, and I specialise primarily, it's not all I do, working with neurodivergent children, adults, older people. So that's one part of what I do. I've written a lot of publications recently. So, over the last couple of years, particularly on autistic parents and fabricated or induced illness. And then most recently, I've got I can't get the words in the right order, postgraduate advanced diploma in psychotherapy, in transactional analysis psychotherapy. So it's taken me 5 years of a lot of hard work to get there.
Absolutely, because it's not just textbook learning. When you're studying this sort of area, there's a lot of deep digging within yourself that you have to do in order to provide services for other people.
Yeah.
But you also do a lot of work within mental capacity and best interests as well, don't you?
Yeah, I do mental capacity assessments for the call to protection and make best interest decisions. It's something I actually really enjoy doing, because we come up with some very, very challenging situations. Nobody's quite clear what to do and can go in independently and think, okay, has this been looked at? Has this been looked at? And so often things are missed. And, we're talking about trauma today. Who I meet are people that have been very traumatized by the system because their needs aren't understood.
And we see it every day in the work that we do. You see it every day in the work that you do. And, being a big neurodivergent team as we are, we feel it so much more as well, because probably we connect with it. But what we see day in, day out is because of this, whether it's on purpose or not, the neglect of people's needs and not being seen, not being understood, it just can cause such significant trauma. And I think if we take things back to the basics here, when we think of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or complex PTSD, or developmental trauma, or trauma, we think of a car crash, or we think of soldiers. That's what we think of. When we think PTSD, you think of soldiers. And I think that what we don't do enough of is talking about trauma. And the more unofficial research, I guess, that I've done to satisfy my own curiosity, the more I see that we're quite scared of the word, because quite often it brings about blame. Because we assume that if somebody's been traumatized, that the person, and we always say it's a person that's caused the trauma, has done it deliberately. But that's not the case in most of the cases, particularly when you've got neurodivergent adults. And as a neurodivergent adult myself, I can say that I experience traumatic events on an hourly basis, because the world is not set up for me, it's quite a disabling world, and I create my own sort of enabling area, and it'll pocket my little office here is a very disabled free zone, if you like, because I'm very able in my little environment here. But going out into the big bad world, I can encounter trauma on a minute by minute basis, and that trauma is widely misunderstood and widely not recognized, because it may be, and I've said this so many times for those who have watched any of my Facebook Lives or webinars, trauma can be memorable, it can be non-memorable. It can be a one-off event, like a car crash, or a series of events, like sensory overload. But we were talking just before we came on camera, because actually one of the areas of trauma that we don't recognize or appreciate enough is the not being seen. And you were mentioning this just earlier on about not being seen. And if I give an example, because I've literally just been talking to Jess, my PA, about this. About 20 years ago, I started my career in recruitment because everybody told me I was good at sales. You're brilliant at talking to people. You're great on the phone, Chrissa. And my targets were a certain amount per month, and I was smashing them. And when I say smashing them, I think my targets were something like £6,000 a month I had to make for the company, but I was making 20 to 40k a month for the company. I mean, they were enormous achievements, and my earnings were through the roof as a very young woman. And I hated every minute of it. And every night I got home and I would cry, and I felt depressed, and I felt, how can I be so good at something? I'm so brilliant on the phones. I'm so brilliant with my clients. I'm so brilliant at what I do. But I am so desperately depressed and miserable, and I feel so anxious, and I have all these health problems related to anxiety. What is wrong with me? I'm useless. What a useless human being. And I used to say some awful things to myself because I didn't understand. How can you sound so great on the phone? Why don't you tell people you hate it? But I couldn't tell anyone I hated it, and I couldn't fail. I knew I was good at it, and I needed to keep overachieving. And I pushed myself and pushed myself and pushed myself to burnout. And the doctors thought I had a brain tumor and stopped me from working. And I didn't have a brain tumor. Now I recognize it because I'm in my 40s and I've got a diagnosis of ADHD. I recognize that as burnout. And I was masking. And every day I was masking, I was putting my own needs to the very bottom of the pile, not able to recognize my own needs, to be able to communicate them even to myself before others. And what I sort of accumulated was essentially more than a decade of self-abuse, self-harm, because I wasn't recognizing those needs. So not only was I not seeing myself, nobody could see me. And you were just saying that sort of level of abuse on a person. By the way, nobody was at fault here. We've got to sort of make that very, very clear. The adults in my life would never have recognized those signs because I did not give them the opportunity to. I didn't recognize those signs. So there was absolutely no fault, no blame, no shame. However, I wasn't seen.
Yeah.
And, that's
That's
traumatizing.
really important. And I think as well, for a child growing up, equally trauma for a child can be not being seen in a family environment, not being noticed, not having their needs met. And it sort of, it's, in a therapy situation, people think, well, I actually had a good childhood. However, they weren't seen, and that's the trauma. And it's almost discounting their trauma. Or children go through very, very traumatic experiences and find different strategies to cope because they've got no power. A child does not have power in a family situation if nobody listens to their needs. And I'm saying this because I know Janina Fisher is going to be talking about this in next week's webinar. And I really hold her. If there's one person I really hold in high esteem is Janina. I think what she does is fantastic. And she will talk about the different coping strategies that children adopt to survive trauma. And children grow up become traumatized adults, because we don't suddenly get into adulthood and all the trauma disappears, because that's still within. And trauma doesn't go away. It's not something. Trauma can change. Our acceptance of trauma and what's happened can change, and we can be healthier when we find the right ways to deal with trauma. However, it is part of us. It becomes part of our makeup.
And I think so many people think that it will go away by itself, but it won't, because what you've got with trauma is, particularly when you've had trauma that's happened over a series of events, so particularly neurodivergent. I know I keep saying neurodivergent, but I think there is this extra sensitivity because it's a social I know that it's not social. It's nothing to do with social, really. It's about the environments. But in social environments, it can be very traumatizing. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not a social deficit. It's social environments and how disabling they can be. And I think that we don't recognize this enough. But what we need to understand is, you've got the emotional side and the not being seen, not being heard, not being understood, not having your needs established and then documented and met, or even not just documented, just met. But what we don't pay enough attention to is how this then affects us physically. So within my role at Sunshine, it's an incredibly stressful job, the most stressful job I have ever had. The reward is enormous, but the stress is also enormous. And I have had to work really, really hard to protect myself from that stress, because what I was finding was, I have Crohn's disease and I've had that since I was around 9 years old. I'm now in my 40s. What I find is, under enormous stress, the first thing I feel is stomach pain. That is directly where the trauma goes. And by trauma, it's triggering something old. And my somatic response is very much in my joints and in my stomach. And I recognize those things now. So I can help myself. But again, it's those recognizing the physical signs. Somewhere else that I always feel the stress as well. If I'm in a therapy session, and I have the most wonderful therapist, in my therapy sessions, she usually feels it before I do. We're so connected because I've been her client for 4 years and we've been seeing one another weekly. And you tend to find that she'll say, "Are you feeling pain in your shoulders?" And then I'll think, "God, yeah. God, yeah. Something I'm bringing up is here." And she'll help me. And there's different strategies, and I won't go through all the different strategies because they're very much personal to the individual. But there are so many strategies you can use to help the emotional part and the physical part and be able to heal. But again, this doesn't happen as a happy accident, does it? You have to pay a lot of attention to it. And I've got here a brilliant infographic on trauma and PTSD. You can download this for free off our website, or we'll stick the actual image in the comments for you to download to your phones. But if you look at some of the signs of trauma and PTSD, I think it's really important that we go through these signs, because I think so many times it's missed because we think it's something else. And it could be something else. But if we look at everything through a trauma lens, we're going to be so much happier, and so is the person that we're working with or caring for. So controlling or manipulative behaviors, this is very much, it tends to come from a level of anxiety, doesn't it, Kathy, when we're trying to control people or control environments or control situations. If we feel quite triggered by them, we
Well,
can.
yeah, I guess, yes, it is. And it is actually about, and I'd rather turn that around and say it's trying to control the environment. A person's trying to control the environment so that they feel safe. So it's all about trying to feel safe.
And it is, if we flip those, because people come to us with these words that almost make us kind of cringe a little bit, because they're the wrong way to look at things. If we look at things through that trauma lens and understand where the person is and why they might be presenting in that way, we can deal with them with so much more empathy and gentle care. Another one is being withdrawn. I mean, fear leads us to be withdrawn. So that's a bit of an obvious one. Denial. So many people. I mean, I was one that said, oh, I deserved what happened to me. I should have controlled that situation better for myself. I deserved what happened to me. And that was something else we were talking about with Janina, because I know my therapist very much adopts this. I had quite a big traumatic event in my life, and I was very much in denial, blaming myself. And my therapist went through all the different scenarios that could have happened in that moment, and how I had actually empowered me to realize that I chose the best outcome of that situation. So actually, I kept myself safe and I kept myself alive. And I came out of that therapy thinking, oh my goodness, it wasn't my fault. I actually did a really good job of keeping myself safe there. And Janina works a lot with that sort of way of working, doesn't she?
She does. She's very, very, having watched her quite a few times online, she's very respectful of the people that she works with, and is non-blaming and non-shaming. So it can be a child who's been through a lot of trauma, grows up, and she will talk about this, where parts of them become alienated. So somebody could be very, it's a bit hard to explain. Somebody could be very much in their adult, working, being a parent, all that, whatever, but inside them there's this child who feels very, very wounded. They're disconnected from that child. When feelings come up, they will say to themselves, I shouldn't feel like this, I should be over that now, and really push that child down. What I've learned is we need to listen to our inner child. We need to hear their voice. We need to hold them. And Janina's work really embraces that approach to working with people who have experienced trauma in whatever way. I'd also say, and we are alluding to this, that one person's trauma is not necessarily going to affect another person if they went through the same thing in the same way. So it's not about saying, oh, their trauma is worse than mine, or or diminishing, oh, I've only been through this, it's not as bad as Chrissa or other people. And it's not about that. It's about really, really listening, accepting what's happened for us, our experience, without others' interpretation on our experience.
Absolutely. I think one of the worst things you can say to yourself, or one of the worst things you can say to someone who has experienced something traumatizing or sad, just anything sad, is the term "at least." So, responding to it, well, at least. I remember when I was having the twins. I mean, they're 9 now, so it's quite a few years ago. And I was in hospital for quite a lot of my pregnancy. And there was another twin mum. She was pregnant with twins. And she was in hospital because she genuinely thought that, or the doctors thought she was going to lose one of her babies. And one of the other mums said to her, oh, well, at least you've got the other one. And I was like, oh my goodness me. Never start a conversation with at least,
Awful.
or, saying to yourself, it could be that you've slipped on the ice in the morning, and that could be something that's really affected you, not just physically, but emotionally as well. But coming home and going, oh, well, at least I didn't break my leg like Johnny down the road who broke his leg on the ice. No, it's not an at least situation. It's not a situation where you need to compare it to someone else's trauma. Like you said, what if that feeling is big and overwhelming, accept it and sit with it. And we're so afraid of feeling those big emotions and allowing them to sort of even just overwhelm us in the moment, because it will pass. I always say this to my kids, this feeling, let's sit with it, because when you sit with it and you allow it to be processed, it will then pass. In the same way as, when everybody was really, experiencing COVID, and we heard that those who were sort of trying to fight it off themselves by going to work and doing all these things and fighting through actually developed long COVID because they didn't allow themselves to sort of be engulfed by this illness and then for it to go again. So it hangs around for longer. And I think that trauma and big emotions can often be quite similar to that because we don't allow ourselves to sit with them. I remember when my grandfather, who I was incredibly close to, he means the absolute world to me, and he passed away, and it wasn't a surprise. You know, I knew that he was on his way. And I remember talking to you at the time and saying, you know, I am just going to switch off and be with him right now, not physically, but be with my thoughts of him and allow that grief to overcome me for a few days. And let's see how it goes. And I'll just keep checking in with myself and see how that goes. And now I can talk about him without being welled up with tears. I can talk about him with a smile on my face because of the sheer joy he brought to my life. And I can do that because I allowed myself to grieve. And I think it's not just about death. It's not about just about the really big stuff. It's the little stuff. Allow yourself to not be shamed. Shame is such a massive part of trauma, isn't it?
I was going to say, it is shame. Yeah, shame is so, you know, that is really, really, I think experiencing shame is one of the most debilitating, crippling emotions that somebody can go through, and multiple shames. And so even things like, you know, I'm autistic, so, you know, I've had situations where I will say sometimes what I think and it doesn't get received very well by other people. And then it's sort of almost like I'm the problem.
Yeah.
And I'm not. But as a child in that situation, growing up as an autistic child and saying things, the obvious, like, Miss, you've got that spelt wrong on the board, you know, that sort of thing. And then being told, you know, you can't say that, you're wrong, or, you know, or shouted at or humiliated, and that creates shame, and shame builds upon shame upon shame upon shame. And so my view is, my understanding, what I do is bring shame out into the light. We have to bring it out into the light, and it might be something along the lines of, I feel really ashamed to tell you about this, but I'm going to say it because I need to say it. And doing that, so because it's so important.
Yes. It's so, you know, and we will encounter people through life, and our children will encounter people through life who don't get it. And also that's okay, because actually we need to almost train ourselves. And, you know, I know that a lot of people hate the word resilience. I think resilience is really important because we can't function without resilience, both physical and sort of immunity resilience, I guess, but also our emotions and our cognitive selves. But one of my daughters, she is neurodivergent and just coming into having her diagnosis now, and she's just started senior school, and she's an incredible, I love all my kids. She is a very, very strong, resilient child. Huge trauma profile. She's had trauma therapy for many, many years. And she's really resilient. And that's not a happy accident. That's something we have really worked so intensely on for quite a number of years. And just recently she was in one of her classes, which I won't say which one, and she couldn't see the board because the board was a whiteboard and there was a spotlight on it, so she couldn't see, and she was sort of doing this, sort of trying to work out what the words were on the board because the spotlight was on the board. And her teacher said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I'm really sorry if I'm disrupting anyone. I can't actually see what's written on the board." She said, "You're being very disruptive. And if you do it again, you're going to get a behavior point." And my daughter said, "Well, that's not fair, actually. That is discrimination because," and she stood up for herself. And she came home and she said, "Mum, be prepared. I think I've got a behavior point on the system," because we get this thing come through to school from school to say whether they've had good behavior, bad behavior. And she said, "You're going to get a bad behavior point." And I said, "Okay, talk to me about it. What happened?" So there was no shame, like, "What have you done?" It was like, "Okay, let's have a chat about it. What happened?" And she felt free to do that because we have this safe place. It's not, like I said, it's not a happy accident. This is something we practice day in, day out. And I said, "What happened?" And she said, "Well, I couldn't." So she explained the situation. And I said, "Okay." And I said, "So what was the behavior point for?" She's, "Because I was being rude." And I said, "I don't think you were being rude. Do you think you were being rude?" "No, I think I was being factual." I said, "What was your tone of voice?" And she said, "Well, it was like this, so maybe I could work on that." I said, "But remember, the annoyance came from embarrassment. Your teacher realized that actually something she's presented to you wasn't accessible, and you've just highlighted her wrongdoing or whatever, even though it was an absolute accident. But maybe she felt so. It's coaching her about her teacher, but also saying to her, but your teacher's emotion belongs to her and actually shouldn't be impacting you. And she's got this really brilliant way of putting this screen up between the two people and not feeling it as much now. So she said, well, I also stood up for this boy who then sat on the floor so he could see it, and he got a behavior point. And I said, well, we talked through, how much should you defend other people and how much maybe you should just stay in your own lane and focus on you. But she is a little bit like me. So she will sort of defend and help others as well. But she came away from that going, I would do it again. And that I'm okay with that. There was no shame. She didn't come out of it going, I'm a naughty child. And I love that. And what that brings about is, like yesterday, she rang me and she said, I've had a situation with my friends. I'm not sure I've dealt with this right. And so I'm self-referring to student services, and I'm going down there now to have a chat, and I'm going to tell them what happened, and I'm going to say, how could I have been better in that moment for my friends? And I was like, I think my job here is done. She's incredible. But this has come from her being able to share without the shame attached to it. And also, by shame, I did get it wrong with one of my other children where she would come to me, tell me these things, and I would get cross at the teacher. So she would be fearful of coming to me because she's like, oh, mum's going to kick off at the teachers again. Well, I don't do that now. I try and help them to sort of manage the situation for themselves and step in where I need to. But I think it's really, really important to understand that actually overprotecting someone can be as equally traumatizing as not seeing them, because you're disempowering their ability to fix things for themselves. And I think it's something we've shared before where people go, oh, neurodivergent adult, I'll do everything for you. No, 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 no. I didn't get to this stage in my life without having ability to do things. All I need is a little bit of support or
Yeah, and
something.
I think it is about checking those things out. In transactional analysis, we call that the rescuer position. So rescuing the victim. I know victim's quite a powerful word. I don't like it, but it's quite historical. And it's when we rescue, when we say, oh, I can fix that for you, we're not allowing the other person to find their own way of working through things. And so, as a therapist, very much my work is about, I can't make things okay for the people I work with. I can listen, I can validate, I can be there. They can try things out and come back and say, well, that didn't work, or that did work. But I'm not going to fix it. And I think it's about being available to people and our children, supporting them, helping them to do what they can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
I, I was going to say as well, and I think this is really important to say about trauma, is that I think probably everybody in the whole world has had some kind of trauma in one way or another. And one of the beliefs can be that people will avoid sort of seeking help with trauma because they think they're going to have to relive the trauma. And that is traumatizing in itself, to have to go through the trauma again. And
Absolutely.
so the responsibility, with seeing a counsellor or a therapist, or anybody to support, with that, it's very much about not, my responsibility is not to for my clients to be re-traumatized by having to talk about every aspect, like they're living it, going back into that situation. So there are responsible, compassionate approaches to supporting people who are going through trauma experiences or who have been through trauma. And sometimes it can be, one of my friends who's a counsellor was saying, sometimes it can be like sitting on a wall next to your client and you're looking down at the trauma and talking about it like it's down there. So sort of seeing it together. And I think actually that's one really safe way to sort of start, looking at what's happened.
And, touching on that, there are so many different ways to start working on trauma. And I think a lot of people think that they have to sit on a waiting list to get a service that perhaps won't necessarily work. We know that there is CBT widely available on the NHS. I personally don't believe that CBT works for trauma. You know, understanding all the different other trauma therapies that are out there, there are so many wonderful ways that are bespoke to the individual, because there is no one size fits all, because we're all incredibly different, strangely enough. But there are so many fabulous ways to work on trauma, and it doesn't have to be a talking therapy. We know that there are a lot of people that don't like talking therapies. They don't feel that it's accessible for them because of the re-traumatizing aspect, but also maybe talking just isn't their preferred way of communicating. And so there are lots of other ways, aren't there, to sort of work on trauma.
Yeah, yeah. I think when it can be the internal work as well, so it doesn't actually have to be going to see anybody else. It can be, okay, I'm going to start being more compassionate to myself. I'm going to start listening to what's going on within me. I'm going to take note of what I feel. I'm not going to discount what I feel and tell myself, oh, you should be over this by now. But really, really embrace ourselves of that. And I think also looking after ourselves, so thinking about getting enough sleep, enough water, enough exercise, eating well, they're all important, because we can actually add more trauma to our bodies by not taking care of ourselves. So we've gone through trauma we weren't taken care of, looked after at that point, and we're repeating the pattern. So I think we can take steps without having to go and see somebody to sort of get support. And the other thing, there are other ways. So one of the therapists I worked with she was an art therapist and a play therapist and a drama therapist. And so, there can be other ways of working through trauma. One person that I worked with quite a lot over the past 2 to 3 years, I've encouraged them to write about their trauma. So they're writing the most amazing stuff. And they're not writing it from an I went through this. They're writing it in a sort of it's not immediately about them. It's their experience, but they're putting it into the third person. And it's being published,
Amazing.
fantastic. So it's those different ways that we can sort of support ourselves so that we can be the best of who we are.
And for children, one of my girls, she's been going to a play therapist now for quite a few years. And the work that she does there is just gorgeous, because she's a really creative child. And the therapy that she sort of really designed for herself within these sessions is very, very creative. And it's unlocked other areas of creativity for her. And she's now developed wonderful self-esteem. And she's accessing dance, which is for her a therapy. It's not therapy, but for her it's therapizing, if you like. And she loves writing. So, and interestingly enough, she writes some stories exactly how you've just said, about she always sort of feels like she doesn't quite have as many friends as she should. I don't know where this picture of you need lots of friends comes from, but so she wrote a story about a little boy who felt really lonely, so kept buying mirrors for his room, so he felt like he was surrounded by people. And I was like, wow, I mean, she's only
Wow.
9. That's really deep. But what a lovely insight into her brain for me, because I'm not sure that she understood that enough to be able to say that directly to me. So how lovely. And she's illustrated it, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But again, we have not paid a penny for her to sit there with this pen and paper for her. All right, we bought the pen and paper, but she sits there and she does this, and she loves spending time by herself in equal measures as to the time that she spends with others. And I think that ability to be able to sit on your own is quite a powerful thing, because it, for many of us, I know for decades I couldn't do that. It's something that's come very late on for me, to being able to sit by myself. But yeah, there are so many therapies. And I think that I won't go through all the signs of trauma, but you've got, the two big ones for me are the two extremes, where you've got an overly compliant person, a fawner who will put themselves last and do anything for anyone, those people, i.e. me, or the opposite, which is almost the demand avoidant profile. And I think, you've got PDA, pathological demand avoidance. And I'm not saying that that's trauma, although if you look through a polyvagal lens, we see the connections. But PDA is a very, very rare presentation. Trauma is far more common, but both of them respond to very similar therapies, don't they? Because actually, if you go in with that sort of safe and sound protocol, so again, give this a Google, guys. We're not going to do a webinar right now on the safe and sound protocol, but you look at the polyvagal theory and the safe and sound protocol, then you're doing that works really well with children with a PDA profile. It works very well with children with a trauma profile. I know Libby Hill talks a lot about the connection between PDA, selective mutism, looking at things again through the polyvagal theory and the trauma and the vagus nerve. I mean, this stuff fascinates us because sadly enough, guys, when Kathy and I are on our own and we go for a meal, this is what we talk about. People must listen in and go, what a pair of saddos, they're talking about trauma. But again, situationally mute can be a sign of trauma. So there's loads. I mean, download this, hopefully it's in the comments now. It can also lead to school avoidance. There's some people call school refusal, which don't like the word refusal, but school avoidance, again, if a school environment, that could be, I mean, think back to school, Kathy. My goodness, that can be so traumatizing. And I loved my education in Wales, and I loved, I had the best friends. And then I came to Derby and found that experience so incredibly abusive. Looking back, nobody actually came and abused me. I found the entire experience very abusive. You know, new accent, different way of dressing, new accent. My accent was the same. They didn't have a clue what I was saying because I was such a broad South Walian. I remember them saying, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Wales." And they were like, "Where's Wales?" And instantly I was like, I'm not the same as you, and this is going to be difficult, and I'm going to have to change who I am in order to fit in. And I let go of all my core beliefs. All the things I was good at fell away because I couldn't access them. I got bullied out of the netball team. I got bullied out of the hockey team. I was told I was too ugly to be a singer by the music teacher up here in Derby. And I loved singing. It was everything to me, as was netball and hockey. And those things were they were my core values. That was what drove me every week. It was what was keeping my ADHD in check, you know, being busy, having all these dopamine hits left, right, and center. And that was removed and replaced by utter clinical depression. I hated every moment. And looking back, it's really interesting because I still can't quite process what went on. I found it that those between year 10 and 11, which were my first 2 years here in Derby, found that an incredibly traumatizing experience. And I don't have many genuine friends left from that time in my life. And that's okay. That's absolutely okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
I
So
think, Chris, I would say that my sort of secondary school years were the most traumatizing time in my whole life. And it was a sort of an area of my life that I just completely disconnected from, because it was just too shameful, too embarrassing to voice, to talk about. And it wasn't until I had my autism diagnosis and I started to look at it and connect with that healing started, and really seeing what I went through was because I'm autistic, and it was missed, and that's why I struggled. And that's why for the last, I mean, I managed to go to school because I was too scared not to.
yeah,
I'm a rule sticker. I went for the last 2 years, I was completely shut down, really,
yeah.
really shut down. And you know, I didn't pass exams. And that was shameful, to actually not pass any exams. So doing GCSEs and CSEs at the time, and not passing them, that was really difficult. And then being told I'm thick and stupid and lazy.
And now look at you with your master's degree and your psychotherapy. And and
Yeah.
it goes to show, though, that the curriculum, oh my goodness, I could talk about this for such a long time, but the national curriculum is the same now as when we were in school. It doesn't move on. Science has moved on. Life has moved on. I mean, when you look at just, let's take a certain sector, retail. Retail is ever changing, but we look at even 5 years ago, where we were seeing a slight decline in the high street. Things were moving online. Then COVID happened, and that just, the high street was, killed overnight by COVID. And then you've got the sort of rise of the online shopping and internet shopping. And so we as a society have changed and emerged, and everything is has moved on. Everything's moved on. But education remains the same. We were educated. If you go back to our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our great-great-grandparents, they were all educated in a class of around 30 in the same buildings that are now still standing. And you sort of think it's the one area of life that just doesn't move on. Even medicine. I mean, medicine moves on. Science moves us on. We know so much about brain development, but yet all areas of life seems to be moving on to support brain development, to support neurodivergence, to support divergence, and and make everything more inclusive. And we're seeing that. And I understand that it's never as fast as we want it to be, but there is genuine progress. There is progress. And thanks to the work that, people like you and I, and thousands of others are doing particularly in our country, it's moving much quicker than perhaps it would do if we didn't exist, and that's great. But the school environment still remains the same. It's like the government are going, nope, this one will stick. This is the way that we're going to do it. And that can be so disabling. The school environment can be traumatizing, disabling. And it's, I want teachers to understand that it's more often than not something that is absolutely not within the teacher's control. The whole school climate, when you're looking at lighting, smells, 30 in a classroom, the whole environment of a school, how new or old it is, the fact that schools are now closing down because of this concrete issue. None of that is a teacher's fault. So this is nothing to do with placing blame on teachers or teaching staff or school staff. This is a lot to do with just the system. It's quite frustrating. And I think that it's so traumatizing. But you touched on there, Kathy, about the importance of a diagnosis and how not having a diagnosis can bring about shame. Because I've been there. We've spoken about it today. I've mentioned my personal experience, and so have you. And this is so true for the adults watching as well. I'm sure there are plenty of adults watching who have come along with a late diagnosis, and then it's explained so much in their life, and then they've had to go through and relive their life again, almost with this additional thing in there, going, okay, that's why I did that. All right, that's okay. That's all right. That was okay. I wasn't a weirdo. It's because XYZ. But the benefits of a diagnosis, and I don't think anybody should be held back from getting those assessments. I appreciate there are waiting lists and everything else, but for anybody who's wondering, shan't I, or shouldn't I go forward for an assessment, or put my child forward for an assessment, just do it. If something isn't there, it's not going to come out. It's not going to damage a child by having an assessment. But I think not having an assessment can, and not having a diagnosis when it's there.
I mean, things shouldn't be based on diagnosis. Sadly they are, and it's about having that understanding. So I think diagnosis can be really, really helpful. Also, diagnoses can be wrong. So somebody could have ADHD, could be autistic, and it's not picked up because the person doing the diagnostic assessment hasn't got the right experience, the right skills. So there are these types of experiences that happen.
So much.
It's really got to be about understanding and recognition, and that's what's important. So at the moment in this country and other countries, diagnosis is really, really important. It shouldn't be about diagnosis, but at the moment it seems the best way to sort of get the right support.
It's about identity, isn't it? Identity is so important, because actually a lot of neurodivergent people feel, I can speak on behalf of myself. I felt that I didn't quite fit in. I didn't quite belong, and I couldn't work out why. Because when society was telling me I should be thinking this way, I was thinking, I'm not, though. So am I some kind of psychopath? And let's be fair, women who are neurodivergent, they get misdiagnosed with bipolar, personality disorder, psychopathy. There's all sorts of stuff that neurodivergent get misdiagnosed with. So having the right diagnosis, it does help with identity. Some people don't want it, and they understand they probably self-diagnose, and they then, that helps with their identity, whatever works. It's
I'm going to do a bit of a plug here, because I think it just relates to that so well. I didn't come on here with the intention of doing it, but Dr. Judy Eaton's latest book was published last week, and it is about myths and misdiagnosis for about autistic women. And I've written a chapter, and actually I know every person who's written each chapter, and it's quite amazing. But I think it's so, if you want to find out about autistic trauma, then read that book. And some bits, it's a bit of a warning, some bits are quite hard to read because it's so personal, but it absolutely needs to be out there. And I think every person working in the mental health profession needs to read that book and understand autism.
Have a look, guys. When we finished, don't cut us off yet, but when we finished, look on Facebook for Help for Psychology, and it's a sponsored post on their page, actually. So have a look, because you'll see a link to the book. It is an incredible book, and I think it's so important, like Kathy said, for those of us who are going through it, but actually, more importantly, the people working in the field, because it's really important we highlight these problems. I mean, we've spoken a little bit about sensory, but I think it's really important that we talk about sensory overload in schools, or sensory overload in its entirety, because let's focus on children for a moment. Children are expected to go into these big institutions, these big buildings that don't look very familiar. They're not places you would actively opt to be in. And the temperature cannot be right. The smells are all very different. There's so many things to process, the different lightings from room to room, the different rules in each classroom, the different rules around different areas of the school in terms of eating, maybe, and socializing, what rules you're allowed to break, what rules you aren't allowed to break, all these different behavioral. It's incredible. I couldn't live my life like that. When I'm thinking about where I would choose to work, I wouldn't choose to work in somewhere like that. That is way too complicated for me, and it takes my mind away from what I should be doing. So it's no surprise that children have such a sensory overload in school and education, is it?
Mm.
It's crazy. And that could be very traumatizing, and children are then encouraged to go back to their place of trauma Monday to Friday. So they're re-traumatized every day. And they can be explaining this, and their mum and dad can be explaining this. And it's sort of like, well, no, the system says, the rules are, you have to come to school. The only place you can learn is here in this building, because there's nothing else out there in the world that is going to teach you anything. All your teaching, all your learning is going to come in this building, which is a crazy analogy, because you can learn anywhere. You can learn anything anywhere, particularly if you're interested in it.
It's a difficult position for children to be in, children, young people, where they can't go to school, they cannot go to school. And then, but if I don't go to school, mum or dad or whoever's looking after them is going to get into trouble. But I can't go to school. And it just sort of evokes trauma in the family because of the system. Get it.
And Janina, when Janina comes to talk to us, I think it's the week after next.
Next week, it's next Thursday, I think. Not this Thursday, but next Thursday.
Let me have a look at the date. Let me just get it right. So it's on the, okay, we've got so many webinars. I'm just scrolling down more. The 7th, yeah. That's next week, isn't it? Oh my God, how fast is this month going? This not even this month. That's like a week into next month. So she's going to be talking about trauma. And I think what's really, really important, because so many people say to us, is it going to be in children or adults? Trauma is trauma. if you're talking about trauma in humans, then that is what Janine is going to be talking about, because trauma is trauma and it affects us all very differently. It doesn't matter on our age. It every single one of us processes it differently. So if you have an interest in this, which I think every single human being, particularly adults, have a duty to understand trauma to be able to help their children, then come along to this webinar. We'll share the links in the comments. But we will be talking about the whole sort of school trauma, but not just like Kathy's just touched upon. It's not just about what happens physically, but also how that affects, you know, like the child being fearful that mum and dad might be, or mum or dad or whatever, parents and caregivers are going to get into trouble, and how that fractures relationships at home, brings about shame. And also there is research, and I go through this in my school avoidance webinar, which is coming up actually in January. There is research that states that fines and punishments and punitive approaches to school avoidance, they work in the very, very, very short term. And when I say short term, maybe half term, like 6 weeks at most. But long term, what it does is bring about shame, fractured relationships. It does not help whatsoever. I was going to actually just talk about, intergenerational trauma. Let's just touch on that briefly, because this is a massive field, and we won't draw upon personal experiences here because it is very, very, very personal. But Kathy and I have talked about this at length for a long, long time, and we spent a lot of time, just so much time. This is probably one of our focal points of our dinner conversations, is intergenerational trauma, because we need to recognize what our parents went through. Not bringing about shame, bringing about curiosity, no judgment, curiosity about our parents' experiences from birth to where they are, or where sort of their life ended, and also their parents, and understand what's been passed down, because quite often what we see as a family trait can often be a result of something that affected them in a way that's the only way they can perform this daily task. So trying to think, I can't really think of an example without drawing upon personal experiences, but I'm sure people watching will be able to think of something where perhaps, let's just keep it basic then. Granddad hated potatoes. This was not my granddad, by the way, because he loved potatoes, but granddad hated potatoes and so banned them from the house. He absolutely hated potatoes, banned them they were not allowed in the house. Therefore, mum developed an obsession with potatoes, and that's all she ever gave us at dinner. And now I'm absolutely sick of potatoes and I can't stand the sight of them. So I'm like granddad. It's a family trait. I'm just like granddad. It's not. When you look back, what caused granddad's hatred, deep hatred for potatoes? We need to identify that, because then we can understand how that impacted mum and how that's been passed on. I know it's very simplistic, but this could be something massive. This could be school. So we know that school avoidance is something that is, it does tend to have a pattern of passing itself down through the generations. I've spoken at length and very, very honestly about my own desire to avoid school, and in sixth form I did manage to avoid quite a lot of it. I wasn't very well though, but I was in hospital and I was much happier doing my work from a hospital bed than I was in the school, which is crazy. But my experience, I have to hold a mirror up to myself. And I think, Kathy, you taught me the phrase catching the hot potato, the intergenerational trauma potato. I'm going, hang on a minute, this needs to stop with me. Because I might have actually, whilst my eldest child had a real difficulty with attending school, did I, that was very present, but did I make it worse? Because I also had a school avoidance issue. So how do I stop it from impacting my next child? And that's where I caught that intergenerational hot potato and did a lot of work on myself. Unfortunately, to date, it has not affected my next child down. You could throw lots of questions. Does she have the same profile? No, she doesn't. You know, you could throw lots of questions in there, but I do feel like I'm helping her because I'm very aware of it. But again, it's that awareness, isn't it? It's awareness of what you've experienced, where it's come from, and how you were treated in a moment of trauma. It's very complicated. I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but it's very complicated. Do you have anything, Kathy, to make intergenerational trauma seem a little more simplistic than my ADHD approach, where I just went to Timbuktu and back?
I think you said that clearly. It is about. I'll give an example, which I think sort of shaped my family. My family, the sort of main heritage. Well, my father's side was Scottish, my mum's side was Irish. So I very much connect to my Irish heritage. And my family, as far as I understand, moved across to England and Wales during the potato famine. So, that was a really, really awful time in Irish history. And that would have been incredibly traumatizing because people were starving and had to move over here. And then there's also in my family over the last 200 years, I don't know any further back than that, there's been a significant history of alcohol misuse. And one of my brothers, he's a functional alcoholic, that's how he describes himself, but there's this history, and I think it's sort of the intergenerational trauma that's been passed down. There's also research that shows, this scares me a bit in a way, but there's research that shows that when a parent, a woman who's pregnant, we carry trauma in our bodies. So when we're, pregnant, carrying the baby will pick up the trauma. And so I'm not saying they catch trauma. I'm saying, if our bodies are stressed and carrying trauma, that's going to be picked up. And I'm not saying that from a blaming point of view, because we can't prevent it. But that really, when I understood that really scared me, because I thought, flipping heck, what have I done? It's hard.
But again, it's that acceptance. You've got to accept, one of my co-workers always says, oh, it does make me laugh, Krista, how your go-to phrase is, oh, well, it is what it is. We've got to deal with what it is. We can't say, oh, God, but if we'd done that, it would have been so different. We didn't do that. This is where we are. Okay, yes, it can be rubbish. Where we are can be really rubbish. But we have to accept it to be able to move on. And intergenerational trauma can cause really good things as well. Like, it's not just, we think of trauma and the behaviors attached to trauma as being terrible and bad. They're not. They can actually be really empowering things. I know that sounds an absolute crazy thing to say because it's such a big disjointed thing. Trauma has caused this really great thing. If I think of when I looked at my family tree, there was this long list of very strong women. And so to several generations back, they were losing their husbands for whatever reason. It could have been illness, or it could have been the war, whatever. And these women were single mothers running a household where they had staff in the household because they were really strong. They wanted to do stuff. They were busy people, right? They liked to be busy. So they were running a house. They had their kids. They had this incredible job. And there was this real theme of community advocacy that run through my family. It could have been that they were the community solicitor or the community accountant or the community care person. But there was a real community advocacy role going on. And when I was looking at it, I was like, whoa, this is me. I'm the next one. So the trauma that happened to that, I'm not a single mum. I have a husband, and he very much does the whole Brené Brown 100% sharing the 100% thing. So it's never 50-50. It's whatever the other one needs. So, one of us might be at 80%, the other might be at 20%, and we make up the 100% between us. However, I still have this very strong gene of me and my background and this lovely gene pool that I feel like I'm a part of, and it makes me connected to my ancestors. But that would have started with trauma, that they felt, well, I'm going to have to be strong because the man has now died and left or whatever, and so I'm going to have to be strong. So what came from that sort of trauma of being on their own and needing to be everything, I've relinquished the I need to be everything, and I'm much calmer about it because I'm very aware of it. I'm aware of how that trauma has impacted several women down that chain of my ancestors. And now I've gone, okay, I need to remove the anxiety because the anxiety is going to kill me off. And it's that accepting, okay, this is my chain. This is where I belong and I quite like it. But there is stuff I can do to actually help myself on a day-to-day basis, to stop it from impacting me physically, because oh my God, the somatic experiencing element, do give that a Google. Somatic experiencing is enormous as well, and that needs a lot of work. It's not just about the emotional healing, but the physical healing. Again, Janina's going to go through this in way more detail. I mean, we've covered an awful lot this morning. I'm very aware of time. We've been here just nattering about trauma for an hour. We could carry on for another 8 hours, Kathy and I. But, if you are interested in this topic, please, please, please do watch the webinar. It's going to be an absolutely incredible. I mean, Janina is globally known for her work, isn't she? She's worked with the greats.
She's known across the world for her work, and also she's a very humble, sensitive, caring, warm, connectable human being. And a few years ago, I worked with a therapist who's since retired. She's called Pam, and she went to Belfast to train with Janina, actually to help me. So she went on a training couple of days with her, and messaged me at one point to say, I'm sat in the bar with Janina Fisher, we're having a glass of wine and we're talking about you. And that was good. And that was just, and it was agreed and it was fine. He wasn't breaching. She was just about a situation. It's something that had happened. And that's how lovely she is and how approachable she is. And so I think, and what she shares is from a heart with heartfelt compassion for people. She's not into sensationalizing trauma. She's into really helping people understand their trauma to feel okay about who they are. And that's what matters.
I'm actually going to watch it rather than be a part of it. And I think so many people are surprised because I'm normally at the forefront going, I'm going to do this trauma webinar. But I feel like I need to watch it to really understand and connect with the topic. I don't want to have my face on display as I'm crying through, this is brilliant, this is brilliant, I connected this. So I'm going to be watching it eagerly, like everybody else. But I think that it is one, if you're interested in any of these things, and I think that we should all be really invested because it is affecting our physical health, it's affecting our mental health. And actually getting to the root of a lot of this will really help us to plan the way forward and extend our lives, actually.
And it's liberating. It's liberating to not have to shut off parts of ourselves because they're too difficult to look at. And it's really about sort of being able to look at the murky sort of hidden parts of us that we don't want to share with people because they're too shameful, embarrassing. Being able to accept them. It's accepting all parts of ourselves. My previous therapist used to say, all parts are welcome here. So I could go and say that the nicest things and the most horrible things, and it was just all okay. I was accepted. And that's what's so important. More importantly, is about accepting myself.
Yeah. And that is a journey, and one that you have to keep working on, because it's so easy with the society that we're a part of to have this shame and blame and start to do it to ourselves again, that like we used to do before all of this. And I think we see it so often on social media where there's this constant reminder to be kind, yet nobody is kind. I had to go on Facebook yesterday and do an announcement to say, just stop the abuse. But we're having to ban 30 people from our page every single day for being abusive. And it's not like they're saying, Sunshine Support, you're terrible people. They don't actually know us. They're absolute trolls. But when we block them from our page, and they manage to get onto another profile, and then they send us messages right up until 3-4 o'clock in the morning. And it's like, where has the Be Kind movement gone? Just live and let live. It's okay. It's okay to scroll on. because I think social media, I use it for the positive and I really enjoy it. So I don't feel like I need to limit it because I've actually cleansed what I can see. So it's all the stuff that I enjoy seeing. But it's taken years and years and years of sort of working on the way that my Facebook, for instance, is put together, put it that way, the algorithms and what have you. But just scroll on if you don't see something you don't like. Just scroll on because you don't need the negativity. Something I mentioned last week, and I'll just sort of finish on this. It's really hard to control negative thoughts, and it's really hard to control negative things happening to you, and quite often they're outside of your control. So rather than focusing all your energy on controlling something that is outside of your control, one of the things you can control is the positives that you bring into your life, because quite often they pass us by. So for instance, outside right now, I can see a beautifully blue sky. The sun is shining. My car looks really clean because the sun is shining off it, which is making me happy. And I've got my Christmas lights outside that I can see, and I am enjoying sitting here looking at those things going, some of them I have control over, some of them I don't, but let me sit and enjoy this moment, because there'll be negative stuff that finds me today. I won't be able to control that, but almost diluting it with purposefully thought out acknowledgement for the positives, which I don't think we do enough, do we?
I also think, Chris, to finish, is that I've probably said this to you before, but it was said to me and it really resonated with me, is what comes up in the bucket's what's down in the well. And so I know that when I say unkind or hurtful things, it's because I'm not feeling good about myself. And so when other people say unkind or hurtful things to us, it's because they're not feeling good about themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay to not agree. It's different. It's when things are actually intentionally hurtful or thoughtless. And
Yeah.
so I think it's putting things into context that, I know I will be much more critical of other people when I'm not feeling good about myself.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, my kids say that as well. I've managed to train them because they say, oh, such and such was very unkind today. And now they'll say, such and such was very unkind today. That must have meant that they are having something in their life that isn't making them very happy, because happy people don't say unkind things. And it's true. It is true. So invite the positives, look for the positives. They're there. There's something positive happening right now around you, I'm sure, that you can look for and recognize. I know there was a bit of a trend once where you talk about it on your social media, I mean, it's up to you. But being able to recognize and look for the positives every day does change your mindset to dilute those negative
I
thoughts.
think there has to be a balance, because I don't like positivity where it's discounting the difficult.
Mm,
So there's a balance. So
yeah,
looking at positives, but also acknowledging that things aren't right in this area. So I think that's really important, because there can be this very mindful approach, like discount all the negative experiences you're going through and focus on the good stuff. There needs to be a balance between the two.
absolutely. But I think quite often, when we're in a bit of a negative spiral, that's then all we can see. And we almost need to kind of go, hang on, I need to dilute it to give that balance.
It's
Look
catching
for it.
it's having something to catch us so that we don't go right down. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's been lovely, Kathy. We could talk for hours, couldn't we?
Yeah.
But that's all we've got time for today. I'm just going to have a quick look at the comments. We've completely ignored the comments. Normally, I come to the comments quite a lot. Oh my goodness, there's loads. Oh, we're not going to be able to
Like
work.
it's just me and you here.
And no, we're not going to be able to work through all of these. I'm going to go through the comments after we come off, and I will do my very, very best to answer as many people as possible. Because actually there's things like, I've missed the name of this particular book. We'll share details on it all.
Judy,
Also, sorry, go on.
put Judy's book on there because it's so
Yes,
worth.
that's the book. Yeah. I also have a lot of Janina's books, but I've taken them into the Sunshine Hub for everybody to have a look at. And I was going to dig them out this morning. I thought they're at the Sunshine Hub and I'm at home. So I couldn't dig them out. But you recommended the books to me, the Janina books, because actually they're very workbooky, aren't they? You can actually work through the book. But we'll add Judy Eaton's book, and we'll add the Janina Fisher books as well, and any links that you're looking for. There's somebody asking about the wide range of therapies. Honestly, there are so many therapies. And for the parents who are still watching, if your child requires therapies for trauma, you can have this written into your EHCP and funded. Okay. So you don't have to wait for them to become available or, break the bank trying to afford them, because they can get pricey. You can actually have them written into EHCPs. We've done it. Kathy and I have been in tribunals where we've had therapies written into EHCPs. So it is absolutely possible. So Kathy, we'll end it there. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. You know what I'm like. There's no surprise there. It's been an absolute delight, and I'm hoping we get to catch up soon, because I haven't seen you properly for ages. We always see each other in a work capacity, and we're never able to then get the time to sit down and, talk about all the things we want to talk about, which is usually trauma.
We're banned trauma.
No, we'll have to ban it. Oh, well, it's been lovely.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure I'll see you soon, but thank you so much for this morning. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, everyone who's watching us. We really appreciate it, don't we, Chrissa?
We do. Just send us a message if you need any help, okay? But yeah, thank you so much. I'll see you soon.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.